All right, folks, for the benefit of the recording, this is code along 9. We're following on from code along 8, which sounds like it should be obvious, but of course we don't normally do that. We take different data each week. This week, we are going to use the same data as last week because we didn't get very far with it. So what we're going to be looking at are some data that are pulled from the Office for National Statistics of the UK. And the sort of thing we're going to take as our response variable, so we're going to look at some modeling, and the thing we're going to take as our response variable is the number of, or the rate of pubs in a sort of number of pubs per unit population, pubs per capita, in each local authority area, so each council area in the UK. And we've got some other variables that we're going to try and use as predictors for this that I've just pulled slightly randomly. I've added another one relative to last week. So I'll go through again just to remind you what these variables are. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. A reminder that I can't see, I can see the chat, but I can't see your faces on Zoom when I'm sharing. So hopefully you can see that. Hopefully you can see that I'm just knitting now. While I'm waiting for that, because the reason it's taking a while is that I've included a map in this, and maps are a little bit horrible to do because there's lots of different lines it has to plot. I've added a chunk option here, which we haven't yet taught you, but might be worth knowing that if you have some code that's really slow to run, which is cache equals true. And what that does is it stores the...
Alex?
Yes?
Are we meant to just be seeing your background desktop with like a black square?
No, you're not. The black square is the Zoom chat. I'm sharing the wrong screen. Let me fix this. Stop share. Can you see our studio now?
Yes.
Good. So what's taking a while is that I'm trying to include a map in this plot. As in literally, this isn't like map DFR or anything. It's literally a map of Great Britain. It's taking a while because maps take a while. So what I've added is a cache equals true option to this. So what that's done is it's created a little folder here called pubs_cache. And what it's going to do is when it's run all the code, it's going to store that. And our markdown is clever enough to know that if I don't change the code, it will not run that code again. It will just take the output that it previously calculated. If I do change the code, then it will rerun the chunk again. But it's just going to make it quicker because it's going to take a while to knit this map, but then we don't want to worry about the map again. So just give it a minute while it's doing that. This was a lot quicker on my computer. Evidently, the processing power of RStudio Cloud is much, much lower than the processing power of my computer. But let's give it a while. So I'll talk through the variables. So we've got an area code for each thing. That's not like a sort of telephone area code. That is a little code in the ONS coding system for each district. And we've got the name of the district. So the name is going to be useful for maybe visualizations or lists because we can actually recognize those. The area codes are hopefully useful for joining data together. Oh, someone says, is it the same as setseed? Not quite, but they're very similar things they're doing. And certainly if you're going to use a cache, you should use setseed. So setseed is used for reproducibility. It's used for when you generate random numbers in R for whatever reason, maybe you're doing a random slice in terms of a, like when you're doing some model validation, which we talked about yet, but anything that's random, it's not actually random, it's pseudo-random, which means that it's using a sort of algorithm based on a number, which without setting a seed, that number is based on the current time, I think. And it's using the current time to generate numbers that look random and that pass various statistical tests for randomness, but they're not actually random. They're determined by an algorithm. A computer can't really generate true randomness without some sort of external source. You can get truly random numbers. There are sources of them. There's a company, and I forget which one, that does that by pointing cameras at lava lamps and using the output of the lava lamps to generate randomness. But there's various different ways to do it. One way that's like accessible to anyone is what's called random.org, that provides truly random numbers, and it has like paid services if you want various specific kinds of random numbers. When you're setting a seed, you're choosing a number that's the sort of number that's going to use to generate the random numbers. And so instead of it being based on the time, it's based on that number you give it. And they look kind of random, but then still not actually random. Now, the problem with this is that David and I were discussing this yesterday, actually. The problem with this is that everyone tends to choose the same numbers. They'll either choose 1 or numbers from popular culture. I often choose 24601, 42 is a common choice, and so on. And because these numbers are so commonly chosen, it causes problems for reproducibility. So for not reproducibility, the point is reproducibility, because it means that everyone gets the same random numbers. It's not based on the time they compile, it's based on that number that you chose, or random numbers. But it causes problems for sort of robustness of lots of different experiments, because everyone's essentially using the same pseudo-random numbers. One way of getting around this is to generate your seed randomly via a truly random process, maybe like using random.org, and then take the and use that and generate your numbers using that. If you're doing something relatively unimportant, it probably doesn't matter too much. But what the cache is doing, it's a similar sort of thing, except actually the way that Git works within our project generally, I'm just going a bit more into Git here, but there's a git ignore file here, and that tells Git these are certain files that you should just ignore and never record changes of and not commit. And one of the things that is in the ignore is this pubs cache file. So actually, on my computer, I already have the cache, but because I've not run it on here before, which I now realize was a mistake because this is taking ages, I might have to just skip this chunk compiling if it takes too long, and show you the map separately. But what this pubs cache, it's going to generate it once now and then never generate it again. It's taking a very long time. Why is it taking so long? It's not that big a map. I might modify it just for the purpose of this and then fix it when I actually do the write-up later. I'll talk through the variables.
Just use eval equals false, right?
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking I could do is just make a simpler map so that we can at least see the idea, but we'll work it out. I'll just talk through the other variables. So we've got the number of pubs in each district, as well as the area code and area name. We've got the number of pubs. That's the first one of our variables that we're going to be perhaps analyzing. We've got the POP, which is the population of each district, and we can use that to calculate the number of pubs per capita. We've got the country or nation, so which UK nation each district belongs to, which is England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, or Wales. We've got the median weekly pay in 2017. I used 2017 because of boundary changes. It was easier to get the data for 2017. We've got area SCUCUM, which is the area in square kilometers of each district in the thing, which we can then use. We're probably not going to use that directly, but we can use that to calculate a population density. That's going to be perhaps interesting. I've also used some of the area values, and this is what the map was trying to show you, but I'll just eval equals false for now. The map was trying to show you that there are certain variables that, it was trying to show you that what this other new variable does. So we didn't have this one last week. It's the coastal variable. And coastal has 3 possible values. It has inland, coastal, and NA for no data. NA is just districts in Northern Ireland because it turns out that the data didn't quite work for this. But what I have is I have the area of each district to what's known as mean high water level. So the area up to high tide, essentially. And then I also have an area that's just the total area. So that's going to include some land that is sometimes under seawater. And I've said that if those two things are equal to each other, then this is an inland district, and otherwise it's coastal. Because if it has nothing that's under tides, then it's definitely inland. This doesn't actually quite work for coastal. It's slightly overstating how many things are coastal. I don't have a better way of doing this, so I'm leaving the variable as it is, and that's what the map was going to show you. Possibly I can just open the old map. There we go. I can show you that one, and then I can val equals false it for now. That was better. So that's the map I was trying to show you. The problem with this is that if you look in here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but some of these are definitely not coastal. Some of these districts, they're definitely not on the edge of the landmass, but they're being counted as coastal, and that's because they have tidal rivers. So things like York, this is the city of York, lovely city. York has a tidal river in it. And so the river can go up and down, which means there's some land that's sometimes covered by sea. So it's not York, though, definitely isn't a coastal city. So there are some slight data problems there. Glasgow, the same thing happens actually, and various bits of London. So this isn't perfect, but we can maybe use it. And the reason I introduced it was I might like to be able to do some just later on in this, after we've finished looking at the pubs, I might be able to use a binary value as a to do some, what's the word I'm trying to, logistic regression. We may well use this data next week as well. Right, I'm going to put a val equals false there now because I've shown you what I wanted to show. If I'll accept cache equals true and a val equals false, it might not be happy with that. There we go, it's working now. So we'll carry on. So the other variable, we've only got one more, which is life expectancy for, well, girls and boys at birth. As we said last week, ONS data only covers male and female, partly for a variety of reasons to do with not having updated things and the way birth certificates are recorded and just not having data. So I always want to give that caveat that we know these things are more complicated, but the data we have, and this is true quite a lot, are female and male. Okay, so we're actually going to be able to do something with this. So let's take a glimpse of the data first, so we can have a look at that. And it can't find the function because I haven't actually run the code. So let's just run everything, or except the map. Because that will also take a long time when I'm running it here. So I'll read the data, and we'll skip that chunk and glimpse the data. And that's not very readable. So let's try that again. That's better. We've got quite a few, we've got numpubs is going to be a discrete numerical variable, although we can probably treat it as continuous because they're large enough numbers. Pubs per capita is continuous. Population technically discrete, but we probably don't need to worry too much about that. Country is definitely categorical. Coastal is categorical. Median pay is continuous, probably. I mean, it will technically only have values down to the penny, but we probably don't need to worry too much about that. Area is definitely continuous. Population density is continuous. Life expectancy is continuous. Life expectancy is continuous. Oh, someone asked, would it take the same amount of time if we used an R script? Yeah, it's just the time it's taking to run the code. If you ran an R script, you could export the image and then import the image to the R Markdown file, but it would take the same amount of time. It's basically equivalent to, it's the same thing as how long it took to It's not quite the same as how long it takes to web scrape, because that's to do with like actually making requests from other websites, but it is just running a lot of code. It's trying to, even though the code itself is fairly short, it's not very much here and there's no loops or anything. It's just that this file is massive and has lots of different districts in it. Right, we can actually, which is what we didn't get a chance to do last week, assess the data. So the first thing I'd like to look at is how many NAs are in the data. I'd like to see where there's missing data, because that could be useful or interesting. And what we're about to see is that there are certain patterns in this. So let's make a new chunk for this. So RC NAs. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to know how many NAs there are in each column, firstly. So how would I do that? What function do I need to find out how many NAs there are in each column? Yeah, is.na is the sort of function. So yes, I wasn't very clear with my question. That is the correct answer to the question I asked. The question I meant to ask was what function do I've typed it now, but what function do I need from the tidyverse to sort of find, summarize. It's not your fault. I asked a very ambiguous question. So what I want to do is find out how many NAs there are in each column. And I could go through and do is.n, so NA's area code equals is.na, so the sum is.na area code NA's, and so on. I could type them all out. That's going to take a long time. It's not interesting. It's not very neat code. It doesn't allow for the fact that I might come up with a new variable later and still want to be able to run this. So I'm going to teach you a little extra. I think we may have talked about this, but there's a really useful function called across, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. So the function across lets you apply a function to multiple columns. You can use this in a mutate statement, and you can use this in a summarize statement. And by default, it does cols equals everything, but I'm going to put that in just to be explicit. So across everything. So that means take every single column, and I want you to do this to it. Everything is a special function that means select every column. So if the function we wanted to apply was just a single function like sum, I would just put across everything sum. And I can specify the names, but I'll do it in a minute. And we'll see what that does. Yeah, it's not happy with me because you can't sum character values sometimes. Let's think of something that's more, say, n. That doesn't work either. Never mind. So what I actually want to do is I don't want to apply a simple function. I can't think of one that would apply for every column that you can summarize. There will be one. That will length work? Yeah, length works, and it gets 391 for everything. It's not interesting, but we can do it. I want to apply a slightly more complex thing. I want to do apply is.na to each column and then take the sum. So there's a few ways to do that. And I think there's a little bit of subjectivity in which of these is better. So can anyone think of a way that I could do that you might know? So the problem with using is.na here, I'll explain why we can't do that. The problem with using is.na is that if I do that, it's not really summarizing anything. This is essentially mutating because it's finding a it's just applying it. We could use sum is.na. So that is what I want to do. The problem is it's not going to recognize that because I need to give this sort of the name of a function, as it were, and it doesn't really know what to do with that. This is the problem. So there's a little bit of syntax that I think you may have seen, but I'm going to teach you it anyway. What you can do, if you want to apply a slightly more complex function here, what you can do is put a little tilde there and a dot there. And what that means is apply this, take the dot as where the function is going to be and apply that to all things here. So we're sort of defining a function using this notation. So the function is, the tilde means this is now a function, and this means take the argument, put it into is.a, put it into sum.
The dot's a tidyverse thing, right? Or can you just be putting dots anywhere?
The dot is a tidyverse thing, doesn't work. So this is a tidyverse thing. You can't do this. This specification of a function applies within tidyverse functions. It doesn't just apply anywhere. There is a thing called an anonymous function that you can define, which is essentially where instead of doing something is function this, you don't bother assigning it anywhere. You just literally type function this. And sometimes that's useful. The fact that you can do the dots is something that tidyverse brought in. And it doesn't apply within everything.
So the tilde is just a lazy way of not making a function earlier with the whole function, brackets and everything. You can just tilde, and then anything afterwards will be treated as a function. Yeah. So we could have done this as well as count in A is function X, X, start in A, sum. And then put count in A here and without the brackets, because this needs to be the name of a function. So we put then count in A. So we could have done that, but I think that's slightly less neat than just doing this. The other thing we could have done was mutated first and then summarized. So we could have mutated is.na and then done the summarized sum of each column. So there's a few different ways to do it. None of them is right or wrong, and they all get to the same answer. But the other thing that I am going to do is talk about this across function, because one of its arguments is dot names. And this is, so how did I know to do this? I put in question mark across, and I was like, if I do this by default, so if I run this, I'll just run it without that names argument. It's giving me what I wanted. But it is, yes, it's doing what I want it to do, but it's not giving the names as sort of the number of NAs. It's just gone back to the original column name, and I think that's a bit misleading. So what I want to do is I want actually the new column names to be like NAs and then the name of the column. And if we look at across, we can do that because there's this argument dot names, and dot names says a glue specification that describes how to name the active columns. This can use dot col to stand for the selected column name. Great. So what we can do is put dot names equals NAs dot col. What that will do is put NAs before the names. That's a summarized thing, right?
That's within a cross. So that comes within a cross. So this is teaching you a slightly more advanced thing, but it's useful if you want to apply a function to lots of different columns at once. You don't always need to use the names by default. It just puts the name of the original column if you applied one function. You can use a cross to apply multiple functions, and if you do, it will like put column underscore function name. But what I'd now like to do, and again, I'm going to teach you another new function. So this is a fairly big new functions week, and then I'm going to get to the stuff on modeling. What I'd like to do is select the columns where there is not a zero. And it turns out the way you do that is a function called selectIf. Makes sense. And you specify using, the way you do it is with this tilde notation again. So we put select if sum is greater than 0. You write the condition again with a tilde. So it's essentially like a function, right? This condition that we're putting in. You can think of that as a function that takes the values true or false. I think you should have space there to look neater. If we tried that, there we go. So I've taught you across and I've taught you select if. Those are two fairly useful non-sort of core functions. And they tell us where our NAs are, which is exciting. So the NAs are in the median pay column, in the coastal column, in the life exp female column, and in the life exp male column. So we can now go down those and we can find out where those NAs are. So let's have a quick look. So what I'm going to use now, let's say I'm interested in the median pay column. So I'm going to select it first. Or I don't really need to select it. What I want to do is I want to find which rows of the data have an NA in that column. So which tidyverse thing do I use for that? So I want to select rows of the data where this condition holds, where median pay is an NA. Filter, yeah, very good. So filter is .NA median pay 2017. And that's hard to read. So let's do select area name. And that's still a bit hard to read because it's very long. So I'm going to do poll. There we go. So what we see there.
Can anyone tell us why doing poll makes the output look different?
What does poll do?
What does poll do? We'll wait a few more seconds and then tell you.
So as a hint, this thing here, as it says, is a tibble. When we've just selected area name, we have a tibble with one column. It doesn't quite select each column out of a row. What it does is it takes the column, and I could have actually just done this as pull area name, which would have been neater, so I'm going to change that. What it does is it takes that column and it turns it into a vector. So instead of being a tibble, which has a sort of rigid grid structure, except it only has one column, this now is a vector. So it's just items in a, I want to say list. It's not a list. List has a specific meaning, but informally it means it's a sort of list of values, which means that R now knows to sort of just, it can put them wherever it likes. It doesn't need to keep that these are in a column and so it has to put one above the other. It can just put them. Just to talk about where these areas are, just so we're getting a bit of an idea. City of London is a strange area in the UK in that it doesn't actually have very many people living there, but it has a lot of businesses there. And it's the only council, as far as I know, it's the only time that actually businesses get a vote. So companies that are based in the City of London get to vote for the council, the City of London Corporation, as it's called. They get to vote for the council there. That's not true anywhere else. It's a strange area, and it's not surprising that data aren't there for it in the median pay. The Isles of Scilly, very similar. The Isles of Scilly are a tiny set of islands off the coast of Cornwall. Very few people live there. It's not surprising that we don't have data for that either. And then the other ones, it appears that whatever source of data this is doesn't include Northern Ireland, because everything else are the councils in Northern Ireland, and we don't have data for those, evidently. So I could go through the other columns. I will tell you, though, I'm not going to waste time. Well, I'll just copy and paste this code, right? We can do that. So there would be a way to extract the column names, which would be a bit neater, but I'm not going to do that. And so I'll just say this. One thing Mina says in the videos is that, you know, when you are getting to the point where you're applying something about 3 or more times, you probably want to write a function. So I probably could write a function for this of get the names of the NA things. The reason I'm not is that it's a little bit tricky to write a function where the one of the arguments is a column name. So you know how when you're doing select, right? So if you do a select statement, if we did pubs data select, I don't know, select area name. A bit weird, right? If you think about it, because I've given that function an argument, which is the name of a column, but I haven't put it in quotes. I've just typed it. And outside of that function, normally like function arguments will mean something independently, right? But outside of that function, area name does not mean anything. It will give me an error. It only makes sense inside a function. And that's because there's a clever way of specifying functions that has been written into the tidyverse. And if you want to write a function that does that yourself, then you have to know how that works. And it's a little bit more complicated. I might write something about it in the write-up. I would need to check how to do it myself. That's why I'm not doing it. So I'm just going to copy and paste for now, but I just wanted to make you aware of, I know that it's probably a bad idea to copy and paste the same code 4 times. The reason I'm doing it is that defining functions whose arguments are supposed to be columns is a lot bit tricky. I'm going to take a break for questions in a minute, and we are actually going to get onto some modeling stuff very shortly.
You might want to try what I've put in the chat. It might work.
Oh.
Yeah, it's something I ran into when I was doing some of the marking scripts. So.
Wait, with the exclamation marks as well?
So this is where you're kind of trying to use something that's an object in R. So I don't know if it's exactly the same problem that you're having, but when you're building a function that the object is that something's going to change, and you want to use it in the tidyverse, that as symbol just goes inside the object and uses it as like a string, essentially. So if the object that you're putting in is a string, say, what I use, for example, is I use lab codes. So lab codes for me is lab 01, lab 02, lab 03. It's just a string. And if I want to dynamically select the column based on the lab code, so lab 01, lab 02, lab 03, I use as symbol and then lab code, which is an object.
So if I wrote as dot symbol,
what does the double exclamation mark do? It does some sort of magic thing that tells R that it wants to be a string. I can't remember exactly. It's something very specific to the tidyverse. I had a look on Stack Exchange for this. So
loads of brackets, right? Yeah,
the brackets. Yeah.
So we can write a function then. So which NAs is function bar name. So I think there's another slightly different way of doing it, and so I don't know, where you actually do just put it in as a, so this will work, but where you don't even need to put it in as a string, and there's a way of making it work. But let's just do this for now. I'll try and I'm going to write all this up later. So it would be, we put var name there. Oops. So there's our function, and we're going to do. So this is going to be. Oh, let's hope this works. Which NAs? What even was the variable name? I'm blanking. Medium patron 17. Oh yeah. So let's try it again. Which NAs coastal? Right. Yeah. Which NAs life X female? And which NAs life X? Great. So now we can talk about where the missing data are. So the missing data for the coastal is exactly what I said earlier. The method I was using didn't work for Northern Ireland, so it just said that everywhere was inland, which must be to do with how things have been measured. Northern Ireland has a separate ordnance survey. The people who make maps for official government maps for Northern Ireland are a slightly different organisation from the people who make official government maps for Great Britain. So that might be why, but I don't know. And the life expectancy ones are a slightly strange set. So we've got the City of London again, we've got the Isles of Scilly again, that's not surprising. The others are ones that existed in, so the only data I could find for life expectancy were based on, it was data for 2018-ish, for like 2016 to 18, but based on the local authorities, based on the council areas that exist today. This is a problem you'll just come across if you're ever dealing with real life data. Things change, people change, like, so in America, if you're trying to do anything with like congressional districts change every 10 years. Here, council areas don't have a sort of fixed schedule, but sometimes for political reasons, things will, councils will get merged or whatever. So what's happened here is that Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole have got merged into one, various things in Dorset have got merged, various things in Somerset have got merged, and so on. Things in Buckinghamshire and so on. So various different council areas just don't exist anymore, and we don't have data for the old ones. And the pub's data from 2018. So you can sometimes go back, and that's what I've done on these, and actually get the old version of the data that has the old areas. I couldn't find an old version of the data for these. I could only find updated versions based on, does that make sense? So the difference between the old version of the data and a new version of the data with data for a few years ago. I could find the current version of the data, the current issue of the data, but for a few years ago, I couldn't find just the version that was released 3 years ago. And they've just updated it to match current boundaries. Okay, so I'm going to move on from this because I've now established where the missing data are. And what I'd like to do is a plot of the numerical variables in the data. I'd like to see if there are any things in them. And this is a really useful function called ggpairs. And it's in a package called ggalley. And I'm going to run that function. So we're going to need to put some chunk options in here because it will give warnings that are very hard to deal with, and messages certainly. But what I'm going to do is I want only the numerical columns. So I don't want the population. Oh, sorry, I want only numerical columns, and I also don't want certain variables that are ones that I sort of use to calculate other things. So I don't want the area code. I don't want the area name. I probably don't want at this stage coastal. I probably don't want at this stage country. I probably don't want the number of pubs directly or the population. And I probably don't want the area because I'm more interested in, oh no, I'll leave the area for now. I'll leave the area. We should bear in mind that 2 of these variables aren't independent, the area and the population density. But okay, so if we do that, we select these columns, that's what's left. So we've got pubs per capita, median pay, area, population density, and the 2 life expectancy variables. And what I'm now going to do is this ggpairs function. So if I try and run this, I haven't loaded the ggalley package. And if I try and run this, it's going to say can't find the function. Can anyone remember what I do if I want to run a function that is not in any of the loaded packages? Yeah, correct. : So I'm going to do that. I don't want to load the package because it overwrites certain things that I might want. I just want that one function. And it will take a short while to do this. Oh, no, it says country not found. Oh, right, that's because I removed the country. Never mind. If I get rid of that, so we're going to have to leave country in, or that's not going to work. And can you see that we're getting all of these messages because of the bins, and they're going to appear in the knitted file if we're not careful. So we need to be aware of that. All right, that's fun. The problem with this is we're really interested in the pubs per capita, but let me just zoom so we can see it better. We're really interested in the pubs per capita variable, but we can't really see what's going on because there seem to be some extreme outlying variables, one very extreme outlying variable and one slightly extreme outlying variable. We could go through and work out which those are, but that will take some time. How do you think we might work out which those are? Any thoughts? I'm not going to do it because I want to get onto the modeling, but So how do we work out which are the two pubs per capita values that have these two like highest values? Which places have those? Yeah, we could slice max. So slice max for 2. We could just arrange as well if we weren't bothered about manually reading it off. I'm going to tell you because I know the answer. The answer is that there are 2 of those regions. It's not Scotland. In fact, I can tell you it's not Scotland because England is in red. So they're both in England. They are the Isles of Scilly, which has a very small population. That is the one that's slightly lower. The one that's massive is the City of London again, and that's because it has lots of pubs, because lots of people will go for, historically, it's just had lots of pubs because people did live there. Now it has lots of pubs that stay in business because people go there, say, after work, but hardly anyone lives there. So they have really outlying values, and there are specific reasons why they do. So I think in this case, it's reasonable to remove them. So I'm going to. So filter, area name. So I want ones that are not City of London and Isles of Scilly.
Could you also not do it that like once you find the values, just say like above a certain threshold or something like that?
I could also filter above a certain threshold, yeah. So I think that is actually what I did in my, that's what I did in my practice one, I think. But yeah, you could do it in either way. I suppose this way means that if the data changed, I'm only specifically removing the ones that I know have good reasons to be outliers. So like I know why the City in London and the Isles of Scilly are outlying values. It might be that just a regular region happens to have had like loads of pubs open for some reason. It's unlikely, but you know.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Whereas like, I know that the Isles of Scilly have a very small population, and I know that the City of London has a very small population and a very large sort of non-resident population traveling in each day. So what this has done is a pairs plot. It's shown me the variables against each other. The density plots aren't all that useful, to be honest, because they are overlapping each other. You can set an alpha parameter, but it's a little bit harder to do that because we're trying to do it for everything. But actually, that might be useful. Let's do an alpha parameter, because an alpha parameter would let us see. I'm conscious of time, and I do want to get onto some modeling. I guess I'm sort of showing you the amount of things you should probably do before you get onto doing the modeling on the data. That didn't work. Oh well, never mind. I'll work out how to do that later, because that's obviously not working. Oh, and that's put the plot on a different window. Cool, that did nothing. I'll fix that. What we can see is we can start to see some things that might be plausible for targets for modeling. So we're not interested in what's going on in this one. That's a great correlation, as you can see. That's correlation 0.937 as the R squared value there. Sorry, as the R value there. So this is the correlation coefficient. Unsurprisingly, life expectancy is correlated with life expectancy. We could do a model for that. It's not going to tell us anything particularly fascinating. What I might be interested in, though, is the one that I particularly notice a bit of a linear trend on is the one between median pay. So I hope you can see the cursor, but this one here, the pubs per capita and the median pay seem to have some sort of nice linear trend between them. So I might fit a model to that. Let's have a go at that then. So we're going to do a model of median pay, and I'm going to say as well, this plot that I did, probably not a good one to include in your project. It's a mess and it's really hard to control. It's just it's a useful way of seeing everything for your benefit at the same time, but it takes quite a lot of effort to make a GG pairs plot into something presentable. And I would recommend that you, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I don't know if you heard that, but our doorbell just went, and yeah, it's being answered. Cool. Sorry about that. So a GG pairs plot is not particularly useful for presentation because it will take you a long time to try and make it presentable. So it's better to have control over the individual plots you do. What I'm instead going to do.
This may have come up in the homework, so I'll just jump in, Alex. You know, if you just present a plot, that's fine because you typically know what's going on. But to a reader, it helps if you kind of give us a little few pointers to help us out. And as you can see with this sort of plot, if you just presented it in your project, for example, and just like, here's a GG pairs, it would take the reader a very long time to kind of figure out what was going on, what was interesting. You know the data better than we do because you've spent longer time with it. So that's why we would suggest picking out particular plots here. You can always mention we did a GG pairs and these are the ones that we think are particularly interesting or noteworthy or led us to, you know, go further than that. And then you can spend a bit of time like explaining the plot a little bit more. And by time, I mean like, I don't know, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, something like that. But just to help contextualize and interpret what's going on rather than just this plot, which you tend to start when you're like doing, you know, some modeling or something. You start with a really big plot, very complicated, lots of things, and then you start like honing in on particular bits. And they're the particular bits that we'd be more interested in seeing rather than, you know, this huge one that would take me and Alex ages to try to figure out by ourselves.
So in the last 10 minutes, I realize this officially ends at 10:20, but I normally go on until the hour. So in the last 10 minutes, I just want to talk about fitting this model. So I'm just going to do the standard steps. So we fit we do linear reg, and then we do set engine. And the set engine, there are different engines you could use to fit a linear model. We're using LM, but you could use various other things. We're only teaching you LM. There are other types of linear regression. LM is doing what's called normal linear regression. We're not talking about the assumptions of this, but one thing I will say about it is LM is not robust to extreme outliers and data errors, as in one outlying variable that's wrong can distort the fit arbitrarily. There are things you can use that are what's called robust regression, and robust regression is an individual value can only, it's basically the equivalent of taking the median rather than mean. One single value being wrong can't distort the median arbitrarily, and you can have a form of regression where one single value being wrong doesn't distort the fit line arbitrarily. But we're not going to talk about that. But that's what set engine is doing. That's why you have to do a separate thing from linear reg. And then we're going to do the fit. So fit is pubs per capita is our response variable. And I'm going to add a variable. Well, let's start with just one. So median pay, and the data is. So I want to filter out the Alsacili and London. So pubs reduced is going to be pubs data, and we're going to filter for those. We're just going to do that filter again. I probably should have done this before, but I wasn't thinking. And the data then for this is going to be pubs reduced. So I just removed those two outliers. And we have the fit. So it's telling us that our, let's set that to be defined as something. And then let's take a glance at the model, glance mod. And also just type in mod. Okay, so we've got.
Why are you using glance instead of just printing out?
Because so models are a little bit weird. You can, in R, you can set different kinds of print method for something, right? So the basic print method for like a vector is just to print the values of the vector. But people who are far cleverer than me, who wrote these things, set it so that when you type mod, it doesn't just print the raw values. So mod is actually a list. If you look in here, this rather complicated list of things, that's actually what the item mod is. And whoever's written this decided it would not be sensible to, when you type in mod, to just print all of this out, and instead set what's known as a print method. So where it decides to print out a specific thing, and what it's printed out is this. But that doesn't give me everything. It just gives me the coefficients of the model. Whereas glance mod
will give me certain other values like the R squared and the adjusted R squared. Tidy presents some of those values in a so it presents some of it's probably better to use that rather than just say mod. To be honest, I just forgot about it. Thanks for the reminder. Tidy prints out a little tibble of things to do with the coefficients. So tidy presents the coefficients of the model, so the estimate of the two things, and glance provides like the R squared, the adjusted R squared, and so on. We're not talking about p-values too much in this course, but I will say tidy gives you the p-values, and that p-value says that our median pay term is significant. So that's interesting. So what does that mean? So how can we interpret this? Any thoughts?
Interpret the estimates.
So how do we interpret? Yeah, how do we interpret the estimate for intercept in this model? What does it tell us? So it tells us the value of something when the other one is 0. Which way around is it? So it'll either tell us the value of pubs per capita when median pay is 0, or it'll tell us the value of median pay when pubs per capita is 0. Yeah, it's the first one. So it tells us in a hypothetical situation where the median pay was 0, how many pubs per capita would there be? Now, nowhere in our data has a median pay of 0. This is definitely extrapolation, and it's not really sensible. As you know, we can't really interpret that sensibly because you could theoretically have an area where the median pay was 0, which would mean that more than half of people were getting paid nothing. It's relatively unlikely. Let's hope that doesn't happen. It's not a particularly useful one. The other one, though, is a bit more interesting. It is, so what does that tell us? Yeah, communism might be the answer, but that would possibly change a lot of our modeling assumptions here. What is what's going on with the median pay thing? Yeah, exactly. So as median pay increases by £1 per week, which was the definition, the estimated number of pubs per capita decreases by 0.000000823. Right, that's not helpful. So I think if we were going to do this, I think we'd want to multiply some values up. So I think what we want to do is say, let's say pubs per 10,000 people. So you'll notice we do that with like COVID rates, right? They don't tend to be presented as number of cases per person, they're cases per 10,000 people. So let's say we want pubs per 10,000 or pubs per 100,000, or there's I forget which one is used. But let's say we do want pubs per 10,000 people. And also let's say as pay increases by £100. So that means we're going to want to multiply that number by 100 times 10,000, which is 1 million. So that would be that as we can interpret this then as the pay increases by so let's get that. Let's do tidy mod whole estimate. Oh no, filter term equals, I'm just doing this in the console, which is bad practice really, but I'm trying to be quick here. Pull estimate and then time, no, I'll need to just, and then we want to times by that. So the number of pubs per 10,000 people, as median pay increases by £100, this is extremely bad practice. Please don't do this.
I should have written this much more neatly, but I'm running out of time, so I'm being quick. So what that says is the number of pubs, as median pay increases by £100 per week, the number of pubs per 10,000 people decreases by about 0.8. I'm going to just put that in the chat. So as the number of pubs per, as the median pay increases by £100 per week, the number of pubs per decreases by, number of pubs per 10,000 people decreases by 0.8, and I mean the predicted number.
So in other words, the richer the area, the less pubs?
That seems to be what we're finding, and that's interesting. So it's not quite clear why that should be. You might expect that number of, so, we could talk in advance about hypotheses and say, are richer areas going to have more money to spend in the pub? Or, are they, and yeah, that seems to be the pattern, is actually richer areas seem to have fewer pubs. Could that be a cultural thing? Could that be explained by other factors? We don't know. But yeah, the richer the area, the conclusion we have here is that in general, based on this model, the richer the area is, the fewer pubs it has. So next week, we're going to talk a bit more. I'm going to stick with the same data set. Next week, we're going to talk about adding in the categorical variable, and we might come on to talk about picking a different predictor and doing something about whether something's coastal as well.
Do we also want to check if our model is a good model?
We do probably want to check if our model is a good model. So we can do that as well.
All right, should we end the session? We've hit the time.
Yeah.